Hi everyone, my name is Luther Adams. I'm an emerging researcher working with the Marine Realm team for South Africa's National Biodiversity Assessment and the Integrated Ecosystem Assessment. We decided to make this video to share with others the process of the most recent National Biodiversity Assessment so that people could get familiar with the approach that we take and to help us integrate with our other ecosystem assessments or methods that can strengthen our national marine assessments. I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to the team. The overall National Biodiversity Assessment is led by Andrew Skono. Then the Marine Realm Assessment is led by Professor Kerry Sink, who's also the manager of the Marine Program and a research associate with Nelson Mandela University. In the Marine team is Megan van der Bank, who's a coordinator and also helps manage the many projects that input into the National Biodiversity Assessment. Pradil Majid plays a dual role in contributing to research but also as a policy advisor, so she sits within the policy directorate and together we will take you through this assessment. You will also meet Lynn Shannon, who's the case study lead for the Mission Atlantic project, and our postdoctoral researcher, Kaylee Smith, who is supporting the work of the Mission Atlantic project and who previously supported ground truthing of ecosystem condition for one type of ecosystem in two ecoregions in South Africa. This video is divided into four main components. The first component introduces the National Biodiversity Assessment and the Mission Atlantic project. Kerry briefly overviews the contents of the most recent assessment, and Megan explains work on identifying and communicating the benefits of marine biodiversity. This is relevant because it's the benefits from biodiversity that we want to maintain so that they are a key part of our assessment. Then Kerry Sink explains the process of developing the National Marine Ecosystem Map in a standalone video. This is followed by Pradil and Kerry taking us through the headline indicators of ecosystem threat status and protection level. Then Kaylee Smith shares her work. The NBA relies on the inputs of students and emerging researchers heavily. Kaylee worked on the most recent National Biodiversity Assessment, the NBA 2018, and is supporting the Integrated Ecosystem Assessment on the Mission Atlantic project. She'll take us through the complexities of ecosystem condition assessments and approaches to develop a national state of indicators to support these kind of assessments. Finally, Kerry explains the priority actions chapter, which broadly focuses on the approach that we take to arrive at the main recommendations emanating from the National Biodiversity Assessment and other assessments.
The National Biodiversity Assessment is the primary tool for monitoring and reporting on the state of biodiversity in South Africa, and it is central to SANBI's mandate under the Biodiversity Act. The NBA allows us to take stock of what biodiversity we have and what condition it is in, which then informs South Africa's strategic objectives and activities for managing and conserving biodiversity, as well as informing policies and strategies in sectors that rely on our natural resources. It helps us prioritize the often limited resources allocated for managing and conserving biodiversity, and feeds into land and sea use planning and decision-making at various scales. In addition, the NBA assists us with both our national and international reporting commitments, such as those linked to the CBD and SDGs. We live in a dynamic period of land and sea use change affecting our environment and people. To navigate this successfully, we need good information. While many SANBI staff were involved in the NBA, 3/4 of the contributors were from outside of SANBI, and those included public entities, universities, various government departments, NGOs, and private individuals. Some team members here today include myself, Andrew Skono, Professor Kerry Sink, Megan van der Bank, Luther Adams, Bradil Majid, and Lynn Shannon from UCT. The CSIR and Nelson Mandela University provided leadership on aspects of work related to estuaries, freshwater, and the coast. But the NBA could not have been undertaken without any of the 93 institutions and their many contributors. To coordinate this collaborative effort, the NBA team facilitated a range of reference groups for the different themes and components of the NBA, providing a platform for experts to come together to first plan and then undertake the work required. This intensive assessment process took place over 4 years, but in truth, the NBA is built on information that is the fruit of decades of work in our sector. The vast majority of work on the NBA was undertaken by specialists who volunteered their time, motivated by their shared research interests and passion for seeing the best available information on biodiversity being taken up into planning and decision making in our country. Why so many contributors? Well, the NBA covers biodiversity and ecosystems across all of South Africa's territory, including our subantarctic territories around Marion and Prince Edward Island. This means it covers biodiversity on land, the ocean, estuaries, and freshwater. It includes ecosystems, plants and animals, and for the first time, the assessment addressed some genetic aspects of biodiversity. Species and ecosystem types are used as the primary units of assessment in the NBA. This is made possible by a range of dedicated experts who continually build on our country's foundational biodiversity information base. The NBA uses the IUCN Red List frameworks for species and ecosystems to determine the threat status in the familiar categories of critically endangered, endangered and vulnerable, usually summarized into taxon groups for species and into broad ecosystem types or functional units for ecosystems. For example, the number of threatened sharks or rays and the status of kelp or pelagic ecosystem types. Central to ecosystem risk assessment frameworks such as the IUCN Red List of Ecosystems are maps of ecosystem extent and ecosystem integrity or condition, using direct estimations or via proxies linked to stresses or pressures such as fishing, mining, and pollution. Protection level is the second main indicator type, also for species and ecosystem. This indicator looks at how well represented these ecosystems or species are within the protected area network, and also considers how well the protected areas mitigate against the key pressures on these species. An important aspect of the National Biodiversity Assessment is that all this information is spatially explicit and covers all realms. This wealth of technical information is then distilled into a set of key messages and findings in a synthesis report. The whole body of work can be accessed for free on our website.
The Mission Atlantic project is a project that's been funded under the European Union Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programme. And in this project, we aim to both assess and to map the present and future status of Atlantic marine ecosystems under different multiple stresses. And to do this, we'll be looking at indicators and tools and technologies that enable us to assess the risks and the vulnerabilities of our marine ecosystems under different climate scenarios and under different management scenarios. We aim to transfer this knowledge, this information that's generated within the project and summarized within the project into ecosystem-based management procedures so that we can support sustainable governance of our marine resources. And at the same time, we aim to educate our ocean resource users, our managers, and our researchers in the use and the uptake of the integrated ecosystem assessment framework in terms of its potential to contribute to improving our management. So the work is being undertaken in a cyclical kind of form. And we start off with a scoping process where we identify the key human activities and the key management objectives within the ecosystem and look at what ecosystem components are being affected by these. And this involves much stakeholder engagement at various different levels. We then look at developing a suite of indicators and reference levels, and these are in order to assess the status of our ecosystem, the drivers that are involved in changing the ecosystem, and the resilience of our ecosystems. And then we look at analyzing risk, assessing the risks and assessing the vulnerabilities of our marine ecosystems and the ecosystem components therein to current impacts and to future changes. And we do this through a number of approaches, both qualitative and quantitative. We then look at scenario testing, and this is going to be done using end-to-end ecosystem models in each of the different marine ecosystems of the Atlantic. And we will simulate the ecosystem state and the dynamics under different scenarios of climate change and resource exploitation and social development. And then we'll go back and refine things. We'll be evaluating our management options to achieve desired outcomes. We'll reflect on the trade-offs that would be needed between our ecological, economic, and social objectives, and revisit a number of the actions that we could possibly take to mitigate these stresses and to manage these stresses in order to have a much more sustainable marine usage of our marine environment. So just a little note on how we are aligning the Southern Benguela case study with the South African National Biodiversity Assessment. So the South African National Biodiversity Assessment is a collaborative effort. It looks at the best available science of South Africa's marine biodiversity, and it covers ecosystems along the whole coast. And so in order to capture the pressures and the linkages across all the different key sectors that are using our marine ecosystem and the ecological characteristics of our marine ecosystem for our integrated ecosystem assessment, we have taken the decision to include the full upwelling region, the West Coast Southern Benguela upwelling region, onto the south and east coast, the Agulhas system, and all the way to KZN, so that we can make sure that we can really capture the same spatial area as is being assessed under the National Biodiversity Assessment. So in our view, for South Africa, Mission Atlantic will help us to answer two key questions that are really burning questions. Firstly, how can we facilitate operationalization of the ecosystem-based management approach in the Southern Benguela or in South Africa? And we really feel that integrated ecosystem assessments will be able to build on what we've been doing in the NBA, as well as what's being done in the fisheries sector, for example, looking at ecological and climate risk assessments. And we are then hoping that we can expand our understanding of the ecosystem changes in the Southern Benguela, in the South African marine environment, so that we can really practically enhance the adoption of management strategies that will improve the way we interact with and use our marine environment. So much work has already been done in terms of documenting the pressures and the impacts that these different sectors are having on our marine environment, but very, very little is really in place to enable, to facilitate the uptake of this science, of this research into management of human activities. And this is really where we're hoping that this project will make a difference for South Africa.
I'm Kerry Sink, the manager of SANBI's Marine Program, and I'm going to take you on a brief tour of the Marine Realm report for the National Biodiversity Assessment. So you can see that our latest report had 11 chapters, starting with an introduction, a description of benefits of marine biodiversity. This is really important because it sets the context and makes the case for why do we do this assessment? Why is marine biodiversity important? The next chapter, and I will be speaking to this, is on ecosystem classification and mapping. Then there's a chapter on pressures. There are 2 chapters on the threat of invasive species and climate change. Then our 2 headline indicator chapters, ecosystem threat status and protection level. There is a chapter led by my colleague Megan van der Bank on the state of indigenous species. There's a chapter on genetic perspectives. And finally, we bring this all together with the final chapter, which summarizes the key findings and presents the priority actions. How do we make sure that all of this knowledge is leveraged to have better marine biodiversity in the long term? At SANBI, we define the marine realm as the area from the dune base, a kind of decadal high water mark, out to the 200 nautical mile outer boundary of the exclusive economic zone. Importantly, we also have an ecologically defined cross-realm coastal zone where the terrestrial and marine components, as well as the estuaries, are separately assessed together in a coastal assessment, which is a separate technical report that draws together the results from the different relevant realms.
I will be speaking about the array of benefits that marine biodiversity provide to South Africans, how these were assessed in the National Biodiversity Assessment of 2018, and its importance for future biodiversity assessments. So marine biodiversity provides South African society with multiple benefits. In the National Biodiversity Assessment of 2018, these benefits were identified and thematically investigated through the review of published literature, grey literature, and engagements with various knowledge holders. Based on the research undertaken, key benefits from marine biodiversity include its contribution to national food security, its contribution to job creation and tourism development, spiritual and cultural values associated with ocean spaces, ecological infrastructure that provide essential ecosystem services, the marine environment as a platform for biodiscovery, as well as providing opportunities for citizens to learn and become involved in science. Naturally functioning marine and coastal ecosystems serve society in many tangible and intangible ways. Evaluating and communicating these benefits from the marine environment is important for making the case for the marine environment, essentially communicating its value to build support for marine conservation, mainstream biodiversity into key production sectors, and to mobilize people to sustainably use marine biodiversity. While the benefits from marine biodiversity were not formally included in the actual assessment or analysis in the NBA 2018, the vision is that at some stage this could be done, especially when more updated and long-term data are available. The Mission Atlantic project integrated ecosystem assessment may provide conceptual models on risks to ecosystem components and the ecosystem services they provide caused by climate change and anthropogenic pressures. And this will provide essential learning and guidance on how South Africa could include benefits from marine biodiversity more formally within its National Biodiversity Assessment analysis.